Vice President Biden was back on the campaign trail yesterday, speaking at a town hall event in Houston, Texas, organized by the American Federation of Teachers. There, he did not mention President Trump's recent attacks at that town hall event, but his campaign is hitting back after Trump criticized the former VP during a trip to Tokyo over the weekend. Here's some of what the president said.
Kim Jong-un made a statement that Joe Biden is a low IQ individual. He probably is, based on his record. I think I agree with him on that.
Yikes. Biden's deputy campaign manager released a statement in response saying the president's comments are beneath the dignity of the office. To be on foreign soil on Memorial Day and to side repeatedly with a murderous dictator against a fellow American and former vice president speaks for itself, and it's part of a pattern of embracing autocrats at the expense of our institutions, whether taking Putin's word at face value in Helsinki or exchanging love letters with Kim Jong-un. President Trump tried to defend his comments on Twitter, writing, "I was actually sticking up for sleepy Joe Biden while on foreign soil." Kim Jong-un called him a low IQ idiot and many other things, whereas I related the quote of Chairman Kim as a much softer, low IQ individual. Who could possibly be upset with that?
Who indeed,
very,
Willie?
Very bad.
Once again, the rule: Democrats and Republicans, for the most part, have long respected the idea that you don't attack the American president when you're on foreign soil. You certainly don't side with one of the most tyrannical dictators on the globe, who murdered an American college student a couple of years ago. But that's what Donald Trump did, and of course, the most wonderful part of it all was that he attacked Joe Biden's IQ while misspelling his 5-letter last name. Welcome to the wonderful world of Donald Trump.
That E and the A at the end. There's some gray area.
You know, it
depends where part of the country
Give
you're
me
from.
a vowel, Alex.
Well, you know, that tweet, the way the president responded to all this, just shows that he doesn't take any of it seriously, that it's all a game for him, it's all name calling, it's all nicknames. Does anyone, I don't even have to ask the question at this table, but I'll ask it broadly to the audience, does anyone think that Kim Jong-un said to the President of the United States, hey, that Joe Biden who's leading in the polls and may run against you, he sure is a, quote, low IQ idiot, which is the same term you use for him?
Yeah.
Of course he didn't say that. This is a game for the president, but it's a game in which he's taking the side again of a murderous dictator, and he's shown affinity for a murderous dictator who just killed 2 years ago an American college student.
Well, and again, Mike, we got to keep talking about it, because I know a lot of Americans right now don't care about so much of this.
Nor should they.
They have. Well, no, they need to care about the constitutional norms that are breached repeatedly. They need to care more. Like our high schools need to teach civics classes. Our colleges need to teach American history. We have to once again explain what has made this country the greatest country over the past 240 years. We have fed more and freed more people than any other country in the history of this world. And we need to explain why we did and how we did and what we did do and what we did not do. And we did not do this. This has never happened before. And it's corrosive for the country.
Everything that you just said was true, it was accurate, and it is necessary to teach one individual above all everything that was encompassed in what you just said. And that individual, sadly, happens to be the President of the United States, because he doesn't understand any of that. Because his whole frame of reference, his presidency, is a screen. It's the TV screen that people look at. It's the screen of their phones that they look at. And his only interest is occupying that screen, that attention 24/7. Sadly, he has succeeded in that.
Well, you know, he's ignorant of history. He's ignorant of Constitution. And he's ignorant of how governments run. I mean, we're not going to talk about the Red Sox this morning, except we'll talk about the trip to the White House. The history lessons that the player said he tried to give them.
They were all...
The history lessons, he was wrong on all parts.
He was making it
John Adams, 6th President of the United States, the first person to sleep here. Abraham Lincoln, losing wars. It was a bizarre... But again, it exposed the fact that he just has absolutely no idea what he's doing, and our history. I mean, that's why this keeps happening.
Right. Well, there's one way to solve that, and that's in the next election. I guess others think there might be other ways. I'm not sure why he hasn't been declared unfit for the presidency every step of the way here by his administration, but we'll see what happens.
Nancy Pelosi.
I don't get it. I mean, how many norms, how many things do you have to do to sort of prove that perhaps there's something dangerous afoot here?
Well,
let
me just say on that point is good, because I had a conversation on Friday with somebody very close to the president who just said that while there have always been problems with Donald Trump and the administration and some of the people he had around him, that with the Mattis's gone and the Tillerson's gone, and with he has nothing but sycophants around him. He has nothing
That's just frightening.
but yes men around him that tell him all the time whatever he wants to hear. And this comes from somebody that everybody knows, somebody extraordinarily close to the president, who says it's just a madhouse inside the White House.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.